got some information, very interesting information for you, Cowboy. We talked about last week, what was the scene of the doc, Justin's activities that you said were most interesting to you?
Well, are you asking me to recollect what I said last week on the pod?
Yeah.
Oh, God, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast this morning.
Welcome back to the hunt for Posey's treasure. This is episode number 5. Date of recording is June 4th, 2025. Yes, we began this podcast journey roughly 1 month ago, and here we stand. The question of progress is likely on my co-host's mind and yours minds as well, collectively, and to be frank, I don't know if we've made much progress, but that said, you gotta build a raft before you go floating down the river, and I think we've done that. We have brought shape to this tangled, twisted, fluid, seeping, weeping, growing, flowing labyrinth of a mystery that is the Beyond the Map's Edge treasure hunt. But with that said, I know this past week we really started diving in, doing some digging, throwing some theories out there. But before we dive into the focus of today's episode, I'm going to turn to the Cowboy. And for those of you who stuck around at the end of our last episode, you might have heard some off-the-hand remarks from Cowboy regarding a potential breakthrough. So do you have anything to share with us in that regard, and where are you at with your solves? What's going on in Cowboy Town?
Yes, thank you for this, as always, extremely lively introduction. So I feel like over the last week, since we recorded the last pod, I got to a place where I actually had hope, and I don't know how to phrase it, but it was the first time that I've actually felt like, oh, I might know where this thing is. Like I had like a break, I guess you would say. That's what I would call it. Like I had a break in the poem of all things. It wasn't the ciphers. It wasn't anything else. I kind of just like unlocked something that I thought was fascinating, and it kind of led me down a rabbit hole, which I thought was worthy to explore. I, of course, shared it all with you, and I will share with the listeners today because I actually ended up finding out, or I haven't excluded that spot area specifically because I do think there's really interesting components of it. But there are two critical pieces that you love to rub into my face when I was trying to explain the solve that I think ultimately stepping back and not being too attached to, I think that's a huge part of this too. You can't get too attached to your shit. You have to be ready to walk away, because if you get too attached to it, you'll just end up down these psychotic rabbit holes, which I think everybody that's actually listening to this podcast and actually trying to find this thing has done. So with that being said, yes, I'm happy to talk about it, but this was something that I'm not excluding it specifically, but again, we can go through the two reasons in which you pointed out that I'm coming around to agree with. As interesting as it was, I don't think it's quite there, but that's where my mind went, and I went down this deep rabbit hole. And what was really exciting this week, I don't know if we want to talk about this, but a friend of ours who will go nameless, or maybe we should name him, I don't know, we can dox him, it doesn't matter to me, no skin off my back, but he's been very active as well. I'm actually traveling right now, that's why my microphone doesn't sound like the best incredible studio quality you've come to expect on this podcast. I'm in the great city of New York right now for some work stuff, but these guys, we have a group chat, and Tron, and we'll leave him nameless, friend of ours, and we deep in a great way, finding all kinds of shit, really, really sucking down the rabbit hole. So I was a very, I think, positive week. The first week, I feel like there was momentum in directions. You know what I'm saying? It's not just this, like, as you put it, the raft is floating down the river. We were observing and taking it all in.
Wow. Quite a bit to unpack. I should have been taking notes because there's a lot I want to respond to. First off is surprise mixed with delight. I would say that we are going to get to reveal the solve, because last we had spoken offline, off pod. I said, are you going to want, or can we dive into that this episode? And you were like, no, man, I'm going to keep this secret. But as we've talked about, we're going to hold some cards to our chest, but when we feel like it's not a winning hand, we'll lay them on the table, and maybe it'll help someone else, maybe it'll inform something, but it'll show you we are making progress. And I appreciated I wish I had recorded it, the Cowboy sharing his solve with me, because I have not heard that level of enthusiasm in the context of this treasure hunt until then. But the fire, I believe, that sparked a little bit of a fire, and that flame's been smoldering. Is that right?
Yes. And it actually came down to, it was kind of a combination of like what I guess it was the cipher mentality mixed with your obsession with the poem, which is fair and valid. And that's what led me to start thinking about, I don't know, do you want me to just start going into how this all unraveled? Because it actually started with, it kind of gets to something we talked about last week, which was the 125th meridian, which was the longitudinal line. Yeah, longitude is vertical. And that 125, we were talking about that last, because I figured out that there was 125 obviously words in the poem. 125, I started thinking, okay, well, what is 125 in like a destination or a location? That came to like the longitudinal line of 125, which is the 125 meridian. Now that line runs just a few miles off the west coast. It's in the ocean, so it wouldn't impact this unless it was in Alaska, but didn't end up like really concrete. That was just like the jumping off point. But I guess I'll just dive into this if you want me to, with that kind of context behind.
Yeah, I mean, let's pull the skirt up, take a peek here at this solve.
Wow.
It was related to, longitude.
I wouldn't say, okay, let's also not say a solve. A solve is reserved for when we're holding the treasure. This was a path. It was a pathway. It was a legitimate pathway, I'd like to say.
Approach. Okay.
Approach.
We got to find some terminology for this, but yeah, I'll put a plug in that and we'll circle back. But yes, please go ahead with whatever the fuck we're going to end up calling this precursor to a solve.
So it all started with me going through the poem, and I was putting that cipher tin cap on. And I just started looking, for some reason, I don't know what it was. I started looking at the last words of every line of the poem. And obviously, they all rhyme, right? And I'll go through it. And I'm just going to read the last words of every line. Time, rhyme. Sight, right. Bright, flight. Hole, pull. Awaits, gates. Degree, place. Not rhyming, just pointing that out for now. Bold, hold. Wraith, space. Minds, finds. Flow, no. So clearly everything rhymes except one line, which is this per foot of 3 at 20 degree. And that, it just stood out to me. It's like, this thing's so thought out. Like, why would it just, your eye goes to it. It's like, okay, well, clearly there's an inconsistency there. So I kind of started dialing in on that. And that line is from the beginning always stood out to me.
To jump in there, I think that's smart, because we've talked about Justin's a programmer. This whole thing is about patterns. So a pattern is one thing, but when the pattern is broken, that's obviously an intentional thing. So I'm with you there.
Yeah, and that, as I said, that line, her foot of 3 at 20 degree, has always stuck out because it's pretty much the only line in this that gives like some kind of cluing into like degree is like, and for degree to be the word that doesn't rhyme, degree obviously has to do with the lat longs. Like that's how you measure GPS. It's just so ingrained, obviously, of the lat long. So I started really thinking about that. And then I just was like, 20 degree. Well, we were just talking about the 125th degree. 20 degree, I know it's not 120 degree, but as people know that have listened to this, I grew up fishing, and in the fishing realm, when we're fishing and communicating over VHF radio, when we're talking to other fishermen about where our location is, we always say lat long, but we would say like 34 over 14. Well, of course, the 14 is 114, but you boil it down to two numbers. You'd say, yeah, we're at 34 over 14. That's kind of like, it gives people a general idea of where you are. Mm-hmm. So 20 degree to me, I was like, well, 125 is a couple miles off the west coast. It's just west of the west coast of the United States. Well, what's the 120 degree line? Where is that? And that's where it started, where I was like, oh shit, the 120 degree line runs over the western United States. It goes through California, Oregon, and Washington, essentially. And then, of course, you look at the rest of the line, her foot of 3. I mean, logically, it's just like, people may say this is a stretch or whatever, but like a foot is 12 inches. Her foot of 3 would be 36, 12 times 3. Okay, so let's look at the 36 longitude line where that meets the 120 degree line on the latitude side. And that basically is what like kind of opened my eyes. I was like, oh shit, maybe it's 36 over 120. And you look at that on a map, and it essentially is just west of the 5 freeway in southern central California, in a place called Kettleman City. If anybody is from California, it is very close to like a very rich agriculture area.
You've stopped at the Kettleman City exit to get gas, take a shit, and go to the In-N-Out.
Yes, exactly. It's above the In-N-Out for those that are familiar with the old Grapevine. But I started really thinking about that, and I looked at this, and it kind of just had the feeling and the vibe of like, okay, well, it's just off a beaten path. It's obviously somewhere you wouldn't just like go look in this area. It's kind of like a random ass town. There's like a random road that goes out there. Of course, I'm on Google Maps looking all over it. And a couple of things stood out immediately is that there's just below this lat long marker, and also just for the record, like if you're looking at a square, like the square, so if, how do you, so like from 36 degree on the lat side to 37 degree, and then from like 120 to 121, right? If you were to draw a square of that lat area, it's fairly large. It's not like it narrows it down like specifically. It's a I don't know, I want to say several hundred square, or not several hundred, but maybe 100 square miles. I'm not really sure, but it's a lot of miles. It's not like, doesn't put you right there. Gotcha. But in this area, there is a historical landmark called the Pole, which is this random ass giant pole that was built. I have no idea what it was for, but it's like you can see it on the map. It's called the Pole. Very interesting that that's there. So obviously, because I wait for you to cast your pole, you start thinking about that. And then I started really thinking about, okay, well, if it's not right on this lat line, like what else is around here? And as I started like looking in this area, there is a national park called Pinnacles National Park. Why it's called Pinnacles National Park is because there's this it's really cool kind of like geology where these giant like pillar structures have like taken shape and they've been eroded away. So you have these giant like pillars essentially. It's called pinnacles because they're big pinnacles essentially. And another really interesting thing about that area, specifically at the 36 over 120, is that it used to be the ocean bed. It's gotten pushed up as the tectonic plates have moved over the millennia. It's basically, there's like seashells and old fossils, and it's like that's kind of what that area is known for. And of course, like you think about water's silent flight, maybe it's referencing like the old bottom of the ocean that has slowly, silently pushed up over time and risen up above the water. So all of these things were working in my mind. So we get back to Pinnacles National Park. The other really fascinating thing about Pinnacles National Park is on the east side of that national park, it's called Bear Valley, which obviously Ursa East, Ursa Bear, Ursa East, it's on the east side. All these things started to come together and I was like, holy shit, this seems really fascinating. And then the other thing that really kind of I was doing a bit of research in the subreddit, and the one other thing that really kind of stands out is that he adds like genders in his bride, her foot. His realm awaits. There's clearly like he's playing with some kind of relationship there. There's a he and a she. That's kind of like what I'm taking away from that. And one of the interesting things that I started to find online was that there's obviously there's the return her face to find the place, return her face to find the place. Well, and he refers to her as the bride, return the bride's face to find the place. Well, there's apparently a famous or like an old Roman, it's either Roman or Greek. I think it's Roman now, I can't remember. But there's an old like legend of essentially, and it was Cassia, was it? And Juniper. They were essentially like bride, man and wife, but like she was referenced a lot as like the faceless bride. I'm kind of like botching the retelling of this, but I had found this online. So I was like, okay, well, her face, bride, Juniper, her name was Juniper. Well, what do you know? Inside of this Pinnacles National Park, it's like home to like the most juniper trees in like this area. There's even a trail called the Juniper Trail. And when you look at these photos, the juniper trees are quite literally on the base of these giant pinnacles. And it quite literally feels like what's the line in the poem? His bride stands guard at ancient gates. I was really convinced like his bride being Juniper, the juniper trees stand guard at these ancient gates, which quite literally these like physical gate looking rock formations. So I was like totally sold on it. I was like, holy shit, there's too much lining up. I'm driving up there. It's not too far from us. I was like, I'm getting in the car and going as soon as my back's better. And essentially, I kind of came to this and was getting very, very excited about it. And then do you want to tell them what you told me?
Well, let's pause to recap because that was a lot. I'm going to actually go back and change what I said. You might not consider this a solve, but it's pretty close. Like you were hitting on 4 or 5, maybe 6 potential clues. When you get in that territory, I think you're bordering on solve land.
Oh, there's also the other gigantic clue, just to add it to that 4, 5, 6, is that double arcs on Granite Bold. There are two arc formations in this national park that you can walk through. They're clear. They're literally like these incredible rock arches. There's no granite there, from what I could tell. So that's obviously a little bit, but there are these double arcs. There's these two arcs which are like right on the Juniper Trail. So I was kind of like melting down over that too.
Yeah, and you were sending it, and it was, I think there's a story, or not a story. I know there's a story in the Forrest Fenn doc where Justin is recounting, like, he was always coming to his brother with solves and kind of like throwing stuff out there, and his brother's like, yeah. But then when he came and he said, here's the 9 Mile hole one, broke it down for him, his brother kind of perked up and was like, that actually makes some sense. And I was kind of in the same boat. It was like the start of this, I'm like, yeah, whatever. But then you started throwing more points. And I was like, okay, this is actually interesting to explore. But yeah, so for that said, he took foot of 3 at 20 degree, which is 36.
Her foot of 3 at 20 degree. Well, her foot of 3 would be the 36.
36 by 120. That's the latitude, longitude, correct?
Yes, exactly.
And that led you basically to Pinnacles National Park. And then from there, you were able to extract several of the points. But yeah, what ultimately caused this solve to fizzle out for now, but in your mind?
Well, you had mentioned, and this was kind of a discussion point because I looked this up as well. People had been talking about it online in the subreddit, was that you don't have to pay to go find this treasure. Like there's no entrance fee essentially. You shouldn't have to pay anything to begin. And of course, this is a U.S. national park, so it's a federal national park, and you have to pay like whatever that is, $15 or $35 a day to go into that if you don't have the annual pass. You know what I'm saying? So there is a barrier of entry financially, which is a big, oh, okay, maybe that is a bit of a blocker. That's kind of where I was first like, yeah, that's a good point. Shit. And then I started looking around that area, and it didn't look like the Juniper or any of the other, I mean, the arcs, like it all kind of like focused around Pinnacle National Park. So at that point, I took a step back and was like, I'm not sure about that. And then the other point that you brought up, which I'm becoming more inclined to agree with, is that obviously in the Forrest Fenn approach, in his original treasure, it's so clearly objectively detailed step by step by step. Like you're literally like he's giving you the pathway in chronological order of the poem. And this, what the finds that I have are kind of like, it's like here and there and over there. And it's like, it's kind of, it's not chronological. So it seems a little jumbled, I guess. It's like a jambalaya. So I was kind of also a little bit pulled off from that. But with that being said, it's not, I don't think that this is a dead end, this area, but I'm just not like, I need a little bit more before I go.
Yeah.
It's a huge area. Driving out there, I think you got to be a little more pointed before you actually get in the car and go,
Well, on that point, I saw a fantastic comment on a Reddit thread on the Hunt for Posey's Treasure subreddit this week. It said something along the lines of like, unless you have a comprehensive solve that leads you to an exact place or that leads you to where you believe the checkpoint is and it's comprehensive, and you're going out boots on the ground without something like that, it's effectively, they called it was like sightseeing, like with fun kind of thing. Like, you can't be expected if you're just going out there without really concrete kind of track that you're going to be finding anything meaningful. The world's just too grand. There's just too much space. Again, we've talked about it over and over. I believe they solved that it was roughly a 9 Mile hole pretty early on, but it took years and years to actually find it. And that was knowing like a pretty, concrete place. And that's with Fenn's treasure, which we've talked about. There's a lot more complexities in this one. So I'm with you on that.
But there is one thing that I found interesting, was that obviously the difference between these two searches is that there's a checkpoint. We've talked about that extensively. I've come out and said undeniably that I believe that it's Tucker's bronze statue that is the checkpoint, or something like that. Like it's got to be Tucker.
Okay.
And a part of me just wants to drive to that 36 over 120 lat long and really like, I bet you that fucking Tucker statue's right there. That's what I'm saying. And to another point, why this also is like, I'm having a hard time shake this, is that her foot of 3 at 20 degree it's laid out lat long style, right? The lat is the 36, the long is the 120. It's like you would never switch those. You never go launch flat. It's always lat long. And it's written, it's like, it's another like, man, that really feels like there's some meat on that bone there. To me, I do think there's meat on that bone, but yeah, I think who knows? Maybe one of these days when I get crazy enough, I may just drive there to find Tucker, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, I love to see it. I love the enthusiasm. I love to hear those creaky wheels and that brain ears starting to move in motion here. And as we've said, for everything we potentially rule out, that's just another piece of the puzzle that we can maybe set aside or revisit later. But I wanted to return to something you said in your preamble before you dove into this solve. You just said something like, oh, you've been rubbing it in my face and stuff. And I just want to point out, like, when you present potential solves to me, all I'm bringing forward are, contextualizing these in the frame of the rules that he set forth.
That's a very intellectual way to describe your what I would call barbaric pushback.
Barbaric pushback. But you also went on to say you need to separate yourself from the solve. And I mean, I know we both went to the same film school, and when we were working on a creative project, in my mind, this is creative, and we were having a conversation, was it like polite, hands off, or was it like, no, this is the fucking thing, the context of the story, here's my fucking thoughts, you give me your fucking thoughts right back. Like, we even said at the outcome, if you come to us with the solve, yeah, we might talk about it, or we might fucking say that doesn't make any goddamn sense.
I think, though, the difference is that typically in that creative conversation, what you want from somebody is for them to hear you out and say, I love it, take it further, keep going, push it further, you're getting there. You know what I'm saying? That's the right positive approach. Not, oh, well, no, it couldn't be because of this.
But what if you believe that it's in direct conflict with, like, if we're talking about a story arc and somebody says, yeah, we should have the fucking guy cut his dick off.
It was in the big. Okay, that's for a different podcast. But in the beginning, I'm saying, in the very beginning, when the kernel starts to form and the pieces are coming together, I think it's fair once you reach the end point of the thought and the journey to find the solve, you can then say, I love it, but unfortunately, it doesn't meet this or this. That's totally fair. It's the beginning. You got to be encouraging.
Oh, so I need to coddle you a little bit more.
You have to water the plant. You have to let the plant grow. If the plant grows up to be some Venus flytrap that's going to kill you, well then, yeah, tell me that. But you see, I mean, we're getting there. It's part of the process. It's part of the process.
I'm just at this point, I'm like the art teacher, and you're the little pupil. I'll go look at your little fucking page, see you scribbling on there, and I'll be like, yeah, that's pretty good, but
wow,
this is where the fucking lines are, and you're scribbling outside the goddamn lines, so get a new fucking pencil and sharpen it up.
Well, so the other thing which we should discuss is that you do not take California seriously, because it's not, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't have sentimental or youthful attachment to Justin's past, which I know is something that, of course, should be there. I think the California is only mentioned twice in the book in passing. It's not very specific. He obviously places in Montana, Arizona. There's much deeper dives into those areas through Justin's words. So you dismiss California completely. Tell me about tell me about that. You're not, California's not on your radar.
I mean, it's nice to be asked a question myself for once. So yeah, I appreciate that question. I don't know. I haven't completely ruled it out. He said every goddamn state in the West is available, including Alaska. So maybe we'll get to that at this point. But right now, as I said from the opening episode, that's where I'm focused. If you're focused somewhere else, that's fine, but present me evidence that lines up with it. And as you said, the pay thing, that's a fucking deal breaker. And that's the pretty open and closed, to requote that, the question was asked on March 31st, 2025, do you have to pay to get into the location? He said, no, not as of today. So when I'm bringing these things to poke holes, I'm just trying to save you some goddamn time. Same with me. If I come with the solve and you're like, no, it did that. You had an excellent point we'll dive into later that I thought was really interesting, hadn't considered. But anyways, back to California. Why do I not have that on my short list? One is, he has said the book is the key to unlocking the poem. The book is entirely focused about his memoirs, his upbringing, his relationship, his family. None of that is rooted in California. So why would you write an entire book that doesn't even touch on the entire state where you've hid this thing and tell people, read the book, find it? Somebody who comes to know me, I've sent you all these quotes of like, it whispers of personal lore and history, all that. So in my mind, if it is in California, like, you guys will be able to say, hey, I told you so, and I'm going to be like, what was this guy fucking thinking? And he's telling us there's no red herrings? So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. It's fair.
I mean, yeah. And I mean, I'm here to, like, I'm divorced myself from this. Like, I'm here to solve this fucking thing and be ruthless, but I'll take the edges off a little, I guess, as you're floating me some potential solves.
Well, let's and maybe we're jumping out. I'm not sure what the outline or agenda is here. I did never seen one, but I think let's talk about, we're shitting on California. Let's shit on Arizona for a reason I brought up. You want to get into that?
No, yeah. So, Cowboy lashing out, trying to poke holes and where I'm focused and rub my face in it, as he said. But he pointed out, he said, it won't be in Arizona because there's a Bitcoin wallet in the treasure, which is an electronic device. And if that device is subjected to extreme temperatures that you would likely find in most of Arizona, seeing as their temps exceed 120 at times, it's going to melt and break that thing. And I thought, you know what? That's actually a valid consideration. And I acknowledged it. I didn't get emotional.
But you should talk to a therapist at some point, I think, for that problem. But
absolutely,
what I'm saying is that it's not all of Arizona excluded, of course, but the low desert areas like the Phoenixes, the Tucsons, I think like a Flagstaff, somewhere that has higher elevation that doesn't exceed the triple digit marker on the reg, that's a bit different. There are forests in Arizona. There are, pine-ridden mountains. There are places where this could totally be. It snows in Flagstaff. Like there's places there. I'm just saying, like, it does, if you're really looking at Arizona, you could circle spots on the map that say, holy shit, that will not survive there.
Yeah, but no, I think that's exactly. If you find a solve, like, go on the weather almanac or whatever, see what the year-round temps are. If they're hitting super high, but maybe there's, shaded areas, overgrowth. I don't know. But again, those types of considerations, I think that's valid flags, and we need to be doing that. We need to be checking each other, and this whole community is doing the same. But that said, it was really exciting to hear you had your solve, you explored it, made some potential breakthroughs, maybe didn't. But another area we explored throughout this week, which shout out to David Smith 4467 on YouTube. He listened to our episode, which thank you so much. I hope you've subscribed, and you certainly did comment, which helps our engagement. So thank you. But he noted, or recommended, I should say, that we explore, in terms of existing ciphers, Lewis Carroll has ciphers. Now, why would we just randomly talk about Lewis Carroll? If you've watched Golden Greed, the documentary, and there's the clip that Justin shot of himself in an unknown location announcing that he had hid the treasure, effectively kicking off this journey. He ends that recording with a quote from Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll is the pen name of the individual whose main work of recognition is Alice in Wonderland. So that's the connection there. And indeed, if you Google Lewis Carroll ciphers, he is known for having ciphers. Specifically, he developed one that's basically just referred to as an alphabet cipher. I looked at it for a good 20 minutes, and my brain really started to hurt. So didn't get anywhere with there, but it's out there, Cowboy. It's an existing one, and shout out to our listener for that one.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of chatter in the text messages this week about the old Lewis Carroll cipher. I was on my own rabbit hole, so maybe that this next week I'll take a peek at that.
Yeah, effectively, how it works is there's like a grid. I don't even know how many it is, but it's the whole alphabet laid out in grid form, both like on the X and Y axis. And the key, though, to using this cipher, we weren't actually just I can't write it off, confirm or disconfirm it, because the whole key to using this type of cipher, alphabet cipher, is you need a key word, which is kind of like the translator. It has to be the thing agreed upon. The idea was these were developed so that two parties could send encrypted messages to each other. Well, the two parties would share this key word. They were like, never write it down. It should be a memorized word that you both knew. Once you have that key word, then you can go forth and try and actually decipher. So right now, we don't have that key word. It could be anything. We could be playing, throwing against the wind. So if anyone has any breakthroughs, any potential keywords to try using in the context of this cipher, let us know. But that said, we appreciate these things to check out. We'll explore them if we haven't. But again, it's another wrinkle and another potential tool here. And if you are going back to Cipher Pleasure Town, you might want to, book a room for there.
Interesting. So are you going to spend some more time thinking about the word? Or do you not understand how to use the cipher well enough to even if you had the word?
I just think the potential's to... Yeah, it could be literally any word in the poem. I know, like wonder was one that pops out. He talks about that a lot. It could be treasure. It could be virtually any word in existence. So until someone has a compelling theory on that, I'm not a math guy. I didn't even know about the, meridian stuff like that. I don't do numbers, man. I don't do them. And this is a number type of thing.
Okay. Well, it sounds like it's a word type of thing.
Yeah. Words, but they correspond numerically and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But interestingly enough, we had another commenter reference that Lewis Carroll quote at the end of the video, Cowboy, and he said that's not even a fucking quote of Lewis Carroll.
What?
Yeah. The quote that he says at the end of the video, Justin attributes to Lewis Carroll. There was a Reddit commenter, though, claiming the quote is not actually Lewis Carroll. I need to do some digging to find out where it originates. But again, there's just always wrinkles on top of wrinkles here.
Yeah, it's really frustrating when you can't even get a baseline of belief on things,
Yeah. Anyways, moving on to another great little bit of information we got from this budding community that we have building here. Shouts to everyone who's listening right now or listened from the beginning, especially subscribed as we've talked about. Got some information, very interesting information for you, Cowboy. We talked about last week, what was the scene of the doc, Justin's activities that you said were most interesting to you?
Are you asking me to recollect what I said last week on the pod?
Yeah.
Oh, God, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast this morning.
You were talking about him working in the lab with the metal.
Oh, yeah. The metal, the electrolysis or whatever that was. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, whatever that was. Well, shouts to Road Less Traveled 3053 on YouTube, who clarified for us, Justin was doing metal anodizing in his garage. It's a process that prevents metal corrosion. Like if you were planning on putting a metal box in the open wilderness and didn't want it to rust. The other thing he was working on was bending light frequencies to attempt to create X-ray vision. That one is a little more far-fetched, so we're going to skip that part. But there was a follow-up comment. Official Motive 805 said it could be that he was trying to protect the box from something like LiDAR, so it's not easily found by technology rather than good old boots in the ground. And the original post commenter said, I don't believe anodizing would prevent an object from being picked up by LiDAR, but my knowledge of that is that it only penetrates vegetation. So thoughts on that little clarification?
Well, so then that doesn't disclude a cave then or something. It's just if it I don't know. Does that get us closer?
Well, the big thing that's up for debate is this thing that it's contained in, is it buried? What's it made of?
Didn't he say it wasn't buried? He said that.
No, he said, I haven't. He's been in interviews and they keep trying to bait him into these loaded questions. And they're like, oh, so can you talk about where it's buried or what it's buried in? And he'll legitimately say, we covered this, I think, last episode.
I never said it was buried. Yeah.
He's like, yeah, firstly, I never said it was buried. And then he doesn't say anything about the container. He's never said anything about the materials. But you put these together, I think it's a compelling argument that, A, the receptacle contains metal on the exterior potentially, and B, it could be buried. Nothing definitive, but that was illuminating, and I appreciate you, sirs, for having this discussion on our page.
Yeah, please. It's always great when we get user audience interaction. So please keep it coming. We'll talk about anything.
And then to round out for this episode, some YouTube comments. Just wanted to give a shout out. I'm not going to name him specifically, but thanks to the guy who listened to our podcast and took the time to comment. You guys are not very helpful. So just thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. Really appreciate that. Thank you for the constructive feedback.
But speaking of helpful, I've alluded to this book, and somebody else pointed out that you're doing a podcast about the treasure. You haven't even read the book. What are you doing? Well, I've been reading the book, Cowboy, and I'm here to report I'm more than halfway through that sucker.
Okay. Well, what do you want? What do we anything to share, or are you just gloating, bragging?
No, I mean, I'm just reassuring our listeners that, as promised, I deliver on my promises, and we deliver collectively on our promises as a podcast here. But I've been working my way through, been taking copious notes in the form of highlighting. I have these pages highlighted. It's like a rainbow little 5th grade notebook there. But really, at the end, my goal is to do the first read through, highlight as much as I can, take note, and then go back and kind of log as much as I can. But 2 things initially have stood out for me. Firstly is there's 3 states extensively mentioned, really, and that's it. It's Montana, which is where his grandfather was from, which is where he spent a lot of time. It was Arizona, where he grew up, and New Mexico, where he spent a lot of time exploring and searching specifically for a treasure known as the hidden at Victoria Peak, which is now government land. It's a military base. But the things that stood out is, yes, the mention of Victoria Peak seems to be like the number one specific place repeated enough, which was interesting, but it is an existing treasure hunt, so it is what it is. And the other thing, which my wife had flagged, Lady Tron, and I think she might have something to it, is he continually mentions an Uncle Hyram. And he mentions many of his family members and usually kind of spells it out for us, who they are, how they're related. But this Uncle Hyram person is referenced often, but never really that many details, and I can't figure it out. Maybe, again, we can get a clarification, but her contention is maybe this is a made-up name and it's potentially a clue. And that was interesting, but the little kind of thing that lifted that out of the envelope for me is, if you go back and watch Gold and Greed, one of the scenes where Justin is being interviewed, there are books behind him. Some of them are clearly legible, and one of the books contains the word Hyram. However, he spelt it Hiram.
And in the book, is it Hyram?
The book, yeah, I apologize. Yes. The name in the book, Uncle Hyram, is Hyram, and then the book shown is called the Hyram, Hiram Key. It's on the bookshelf to the right of him if you go back and look at this documentary shot.
Interesting. He doesn't seem like someone that makes a typo,
Yeah, and if you Google Hyram versus Hyram, Hiram versus Hy, it says they were kind of, in terms of spelling, they're interchanged often. So I don't know what the book is about. Maybe that's something to explore later. But when Uncle Hyram is mentioned in the book, it's alongside interesting things, one of which specifically is Uncle Hyram's book of conquistador ciphers.
Okay. I've never heard of a conquistador cipher. It sounds like a Latin cowboy cipher, maybe?
Well, we've talked about existing ciphers out there. We've talked about, where to look. One thing, he's talked a lot about Spanish gold, conquistador gold, and then, yes, specifically Uncle Hyram's conquistador ciphers mentioned in this book. I don't know. Again, I don't have anywhere I've gone here from this, but it's an interesting little tidbit that I'm going to flesh out for our listeners, and maybe we come back to it at some point.
Have you looked up what the conquistador cipher is?
I haven't even had a chance to explore that. I've cooled off. I kind of checked out of Cipher Pleasure Town as you were checking in, because I want to get through this book. I really do. But I will say I know what everyone's talking about. The book is certainly informing things, and I've having followed this journey and followed the subreddit and the collective kind of theories that are out there, I now understand the most common theories out there right now. I would say, if you had to say, like, what is the number one community ranked solve, and it has to be relegated to the Dillon, Montana area or thereabouts. And that's the camp my wife is in, Lady Tron. She's been pushing for. There's so much compelling evidence to support it. But at the same time, Justin himself announced he's doing a book signing. And where is he doing the book signing? Dillon, Montana. What do you think about that?
Seems a little on the nose if that's where you hit the treasure. But at the same time, maybe he's trying to get people to, you know what I'm saying? Maybe he is trying to wink, wink, nod, nod. Maybe.
That's what I'm saying. Like, Forrest Fenn did a lot of book signings. He never did them, as far as I know, in Yellowstone, and certainly not near 9 Mile Hole, but maybe he did. But as you said, I flipped it. I said, maybe Justin really wants this thing to be done, and he feels like there's not enough progress, so he wants to get people to Dillon, Montana. How do you do that? You set up a book signing. What do you think, listeners? Where are you at? Do you think this precludes Dillon area or supports the idea, the fact that he's doing this book signing there? Cowboy?
Yeah, I wonder. I'd be really curious to hear what he says at the book signing. I'm sure he'll give like a speech or do some kind of public talk to the people that are there. And I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that. I mean, is he gonna drop something like, "You're on the right path" or something, some bullshit like that?
Thanks for coming here. You're much closer to finding it now. Yeah, I don't know.
Hotter, warmer.
I would love it if any of you listeners are out there that do attend, would love to get any sort of boots on the ground account of how that went. Share it with us. We're open for emails. As we've said, our email is thehuntforposiestreasure@gmail.com, or comment on our YouTubes. But that said, I think we're really getting close to the end here. I had a few more things to dive into, but it's too much, another can of worms we can't open. Will just be too much to dive into. The final thing, though, I'd like to talk about is the aspect of using AI over the course of trying to solve this thing. And it's been a common thing on the subreddit. It's been something I've attempted. I assume you have. I know our colleague who's also helping search was doing it extensively. But I think I just wanted to put like a disclaimer, I don't even know, tread lightly. Because these large language models, they want to give you what you want. So if you tell it to go find meaning in this poem or do this, it's going to give you something. And it might even distort the rules that you laid out in the initial prompt. And we ran into that at one point. A friend had thought they had cracked the cipher based off of, I forget what even deciphering methodology. But then when you really broke it down, how the GPT was going through it, it wasn't making a ton of sense. So where do you stand on the use of AI for this?
I think actually, to contradict that, I think for ciphers, depending on the cipher, it can be incredibly helpful. I'm looking at this, the Lewis Carroll cipher that basically, you kind of have like a keyword, and that keyword unlocks like some kind of message, or it encrypts it in a way. It's really good at that if you lay out the rules clearly. It's really good at that grunt work. I for certain things like that, it's really, really, really helpful. When, you're like, what could a foot of 3 at 20 degree mean? I don't think you're going to get there with that. I think you need to be directing it in a way that's very specific, and you know what the outcome you're looking for is. Because if it's too vague, it doesn't quite get you there. But I don't think it's a bad idea to use it at all. I just think you should be thoughtful about how you're using it, and I think it can be very powerful.
Are you checking the work, though? Because, that was my theory. Okay, this thing's supposed to, crunch numbers and sort through large, vast amounts of data. So I literally ran the poem through it and said, give me the syllable counts of each word. That is an extremely basic instruction. And it spit it out, and I was like, this is great. But as I started going through it, I was like, wait, that doesn't line up with the count I had on my side. And then I went into the words, and I said, okay, can you live what, and counted the syllables myself and said, wait, this is wrong. Go back to the GPT. I said, that was an incorrect count. It goes back to me and says, you're right. And then it recalculated it, gave me new numbers, and I think even some of which of those were wrong. So I mean, up
Yeah.
until fucking 3 months, it couldn't even count the number of letters in strawberry. Like, I'm no scientist, data scientist, but I feel like people who know this shit can maybe explain better. Like, it has some issues with that kind of like granular stuff. Maybe, I don't know. That's all. It's just be careful.
Yeah. I think
Like, check the work.
you should, yeah, check your work always. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's fair.
I think that's really. But like, yeah, I don't know. And I also think Justin being so savvy with computers, with that space. I mean, he was creating his own facial recognition technology. I gotta imagine he explored these LLMs like extensively to see if they could glean anything right off the surface from what he's put in there. But who knows? They're advancing every day.
That I think is probably the more important takeaway is that this guy's a software engineer and we're talking about a technology that he has got to be very familiar with. I would be he probably tried every which way to crack whatever it is he had done to it and tried all the different AI products out there. And I doubt that he got anything back that indicated that he was going to get screwed by AI with somebody just so I think that's probably the better, but again, like I'm personally not against it for
Yeah.
specific things that you need help with. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think like one thing that was helpful was, pull me all of the national landmarks in Arizona that are related to this term. Like that type of research, I think can be very effective. But when it comes to like decryption and that stuff, I would say tread lightly, double check your work. Or maybe there's other models, like maybe GPT isn't the one for it. Or maybe there's, Claude, all those other guys. Anyways, discussion for a different day. We want to hear from you all listeners, though. Those of you who've read the full book, like where are you at? Where are your solves? Where are you all heading? Is there anything you want us to explore on this show? Because we're in the raft now. We're in the great unknown, the wide open here. We're formulating our solves, but we obviously will take any kind of help we can get.
Yeah. Yep. We take all comers, become all takers. So
Well, before we close here, any final departing thoughts for you, Sir Cowboy?
You kind of lit the cipher fire back inside of me. The other final thought that I have, which may not be as relevant, and I'm sure people have thoughts about this, but as Montana comes clear into the picture and this whole Dylan conversation, and we've been talking about Montana a lot in our group thread this week, it's hard for me to imagine that Justin would hide the treasure somewhere where there's like pervasive grizzly bears.
Mm.
The last thing I think Justin wants is for there to be a headline: treasure hunter looking for Justin Posey's treasure is mauled by a grizzly bear and killed. Like that is a headline, I think, especially after the forced fen issues that he definitely doesn't want. So again, this is generalized and I could be off here, and I did actually look up in Montana, there's roughly one death for grizzly bears every year in the state. So it's not that common, but it just the optics of it are, you had brought up too, it's like, well, there's snakes in Arizona. That is true. There's probably more snake deaths in Arizona than there are grizzly bear deaths in Montana. So I hear you on that, but it's a far different situation, I think, publicly. If someone's bit by a rattlesnake, that's one thing. If someone's mauled by a grizzly bear and torn apart, that it's just like a fundamentally different. The outcomes are the same, but I don't know, the PR around that, I find it hard to believe that he wants any part of that. So I don't know. That's in the back of my mind.
He certainly stressed that over and over again because, when it comes to me, how I'm approaching this, I go back to what he said, what he's done, his actions, and that's a consistent theme. He's reiterated, be safe, don't do anything dangerous, don't put yourself, in perilous situations. There's a whole section about safety and, equipment you should be bringing, but at the same time, this is a treasure hunt into the West, into settled land, uncivilized land. So there is an inherent level of danger throughout, but it's interesting to consider. So we covered a lot today, and I hope it was new for some of you who are even the most seasoned treasure hunters, or perhaps it refreshed something you had forgotten about. But we're going to continue on. I think next week we're going to be diving into the poem itself, looking at it line by line, kind of coming up with some common ideas and theories and maybe assumptions, because as we've said from the very beginning, you have to take some leaps of faith as you pursue this thing. There are so many rules that can negate things, but at the same time, you got to go forward beyond that and keep marching until you find a dead end. But from there, so you're exploring ciphers. Is that where you're going from here? Continuing on with that Carroll cipher, or?
Yeah, I'm gonna probably stick to that for a little bit here. Yeah, it's gonna kind of got my interest peaked a little bit. Find the right word.
And I will trudge along here, continuing on with the book. We might be getting Cowboy to take the plunge and get the audio book there, have somebody else read the book. I thought it was cool last week when we had Justin reading the poem. So we'll see if we can get some other clips in here. But yeah, we want to hear from you all. We're still exploring. We're only 5 episodes in, but we're going to find this thing.
Maybe by next week. Who knows?
Who knows? Until then, we will talk to you next time. Thank you all so much for listening. Keep going. Keep researching. Tell us all your secrets, please. And happy hunting.
Look out for grizzly bears and snakes. Stay safe. I think it's in California.